Imagine a single sentence, spoken in a quiet room, that could shake the very foundation of a thousand-year-old institution. That's exactly what happened one Tuesday morning. It wasn't a loud shout or a dramatic scene, but a calm, clear statement that changed everything. It was like a rock dropped into a perfectly still pond, and the ripples from that single moment would spread out to touch every corner of the royal world, exposing secrets and redrawing the lines of power that everyone thought were permanent. The scene was a big, old stone barn on a country estate, a place usually used for talking about farming. Journalists who write about the royal family and people who report on agriculture had all come together for what was supposed to be a very boring, predictable meeting. They were there to discuss things like crop growth, how the land was being managed, and maybe some updates on horse training for the Olympics. The whole event was always very proper and serious, sticking to practical topics and never, ever talking about the personal lives or politics of the royal family. Princess Anne, known for being sharp and no nonsense, was in charge, answering questions about money and farming plans before rushing off to get back to her own work on the farm. It was all very routine. Then, everything flipped upside down. It was almost lunchtime when a reporter from a big Sunday newspaper got to ask the last question. Instead of asking about solar panels on the estate's roofs, he brought up the big state ceremony coming up in London. He pointed out that the seating plan showed something very unusual. Princess Anne was scheduled to walk right behind the king, in a spot that was normally reserved for the queen. He wanted to know if this was just a one-time change, or if it meant something much bigger and more permanent about who held power in the royal court. Normally, any question like this would be met with a polite but firm no comment. The palace press officers are trained to step in and steer the conversation back to safe topics. But this time, before anyone could stop her, Princess Anne raised her hand. She leaned forward, cleared her throat, and said something that would blow the doors wide open. She said the arrangement was actually based on a secret part of the Constitution that had been hidden from the public ever since the late Queen had passed away. The entire room fell into a stunned, dead silence. Princess Anne went on to explain the real legal rules of the current reign. She stated that the Queen's title was bound by a strict agreement, signed way back in 2005, just before her marriage to the then Prince Charles. This agreement, Anne said, clearly barred the Queen from having any real decision-making power over the royal estates or who gets appointed to court jobs, especially if the king were to become seriously ill. Anne made it crystal clear that the title of Queen was just a nice, respectful name, and it came with absolutely zero actual authority to govern. She didn't use angry or emotional words. She spoke with the cold, sharp precision of a lawyer, mentioning exact dates and specific rules. She told the stunned journalists that the public deserved to know the truth, that the real management of the monarchy remained firmly in the hands of the direct bloodline, ensuring the crown's future would never be put at risk by people who didn't have a hereditary right to the throne. The effect of her words was immediate. The two palace press officers in the back jumped up from their seats and rushed out the side doors, already on their phones in a panic to alert their bosses in London. The journalists in the front row started typing frantically, sending out urgent news alerts to their offices. In an instant, a briefing about farm drainage had become the biggest royal story in a generation. As the day went on, the reasons behind Anne's sudden break from her usual silence started to come out. People in London said that the princess had been getting more and more frustrated over the past 6 months. While the king was recovering from his medical treatments, the Queen's office had been quietly giving orders to estate managers without consulting the proper councils. Anne saw this as a direct violation of the court's age-old rules and boundaries. A strange puzzle emerged when the official written record of the meeting was posted online. The paragraph containing Anne's explosive quote about the secret agreement was missing. It had been replaced by a boring, generic sentence saying she had just discussed standard matters of royal precedence. This suggested someone had gone into the palace's computer system to try and erase her words before the international news could spread them. But the mystery was solved quickly when a tech worker from a different palace leaked the original audio recording to a news network. Digital trackers showed the order to change the official text had come directly from the Queen's own private secretary, who had tried to use an emergency code to alter the press release. This failed attempt to hide the truth only made the public even more interested, as the media realized the Queen's own office was actively trying to cover up the legal limits of her title. Prince William, the future king, was told about his aunt's statement while he was visiting a school in Wales. He immediately told his team to put out a short message saying he fully supported everything the Princess Royal had said. This show of support from the heir to the throne proved that Anne wasn't acting alone as a rebel. She was the public voice of a coordinated effort by the core bloodline to strip the Queen's family of any remaining influence. The king himself, recovering elsewhere, didn't oppose his sister's actions. The Princess Royal, her message delivered, left the barn and went back to her private quarters, refusing to take any calls from the palace directors who were surely trying to contain the damage. She had spoken her truth, and now the Queen's household would have to deal with the massive fallout. The wall around the inner circle of the throne had been publicly rebuilt, and the real balance of power inside the modern monarchy had been permanently exposed for the whole world to see. Now, let's go back a few weeks to see how Princess Anne got the proof she needed. It all started with a heavy brass key turning in the lock of an old red dispatch box inside the private archive room at Windsor Castle. Princess Anne stood there, surrounded by shelves filled with centuries of royal letters and documents. A senior archive worker, wearing white gloves to protect the ancient papers, carefully lifted a thick bundle from the box. They were tied with a faded silk ribbon and had the personal seal of the late Queen's private secretary. Anne took the bundle, placed it under a bright desk lamp, and started reading the first page. The contents of that red box provided the absolute, rock-solid legal foundation for the public disclosure she would later deliver. For years, the public had been told that the rules for the current reign were all settled during standard discussions before the coronation. But these papers told a completely different story. They proved that a highly secret legal document had been drafted in April 2005 to manage the exact limits of the Queen's future role. It was officially called the Instrument of Dynamic Restraint, and it had the signatures of the late Queen, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the current King. The most important part of this document focused entirely on separating the Queen's title from the Crown's real power. The lawyers who wrote it had worried that a future health crisis could leave the monarch open to pressure from within the household. To protect the institution, the agreement said the Queen's role would remain strictly ceremonial. She would have no automatic seat on the key councils that manage the royal estates. If the king were to face a long period of recovery, the management of the royal estates would immediately pass to the next adult heir, who would work directly with Princess Anne. But Anne's investigation of the red box also uncovered something else: a series of unauthorized changes that had been secretly made over the past 6 months. While the king was getting his treatments in early spring, the Queen's private office had quietly moved several key household appointments from the public system to a private account managed by her own office. This included senior land agents and a new communications director, effectively trying to build an independent power base. The discovery of these unauthorized changes created a huge problem for the palace's lawyers. Government officials were called in to review the evidence. They confirmed that the funding shifts broke strict transparency rules set by Parliament. The Queen's office had been using money meant for personal hospitality to pay the salaries of people who were secretly rewriting estate management policies. The financial inspectors made it clear that this illegal money loop had to be shut down immediately to avoid a major public scandal. An even deeper mystery developed when the archive worker checked the digital records. The log showed that the red box had been checked out of the central vault for 48 hours in early May, right when the king was in London for his treatments. The checkout request carried the digital signature of an assistant who worked exclusively for the Queen's household. The box was returned without any report explaining why it was taken. Princess Anne launched an immediate investigation to see if the documents had been tampered with. The tech team used high-resolution scanners to examine the signatures and the paper itself. The mystery was solved within hours when the scanners found a tiny digital watermark on the final page. The original third page of the agreement, which detailed strict limits on the Queen's travel and staff budgets, had been removed and replaced with a perfect copy that had the financial limits completely removed. This discovery proved that the Queen's office had deliberately tried to alter the historical record to get more financial freedom for herself. The copy was so good it required special printing equipment, usually used for state documents. Anne used this physical evidence of tampering to get an order from the king, giving her total power to seize all the files held by the Queen's team. The legal safety net the Queen had tried to build had been completely destroyed by a simple scan. Anne then presented the original, unaltered document to a government meeting, and officials immediately confirmed they would only recognize the terms signed in 2005, making all the Queen's changes completely worthless under British law. The administrative control around the throne had been successfully reinforced, leaving the Queen's faction with no legal ground to stand on. Next, the battle moved to a different room, where the very rules of succession were being fought over. The state dining room remained locked for 6 hours as the Archbishop of Canterbury and a group of the country's top constitutional lawyers met in secret. At the center of the table lay the original copy of the Regency Act of 1937, which lays out what happens if a monarch can't do their job. The core of the legal debate was about who would be in charge if the king's recovery took a long time. For decades, everyone assumed that if a monarch became unable to perform their duties, the next adult in line, Prince William, would automatically take over as regent. However, the lawyers discovered that sneaky changes had been made to try and create a joint council of state. This new council would give Queen Camilla an equal vote alongside the Prince of Wales on important appointments and decisions. Princess Anne's public revelation had effectively exposed this secret plan before it could be formally approved by Parliament. By pointing to the original 2005 agreement, Anne had given the Council the legal power to challenge the validity of this proposed joint council. She argued that the throne could not be managed by a committee, especially one that included non-blood relatives who did not carry the historic burden of the succession. The institution needed absolute clarity, and any attempt to weaken the Prince of Wales's future authority was a violation of the Constitution. The tension in the room rose when the government's lawyer presented a secret memo from the Prime Minister's office. The memo showed that the Prime Minister had been advised to accept the joint council model to avoid a public family fight while the king was recovering. They were worried that a legal battle would make the country look unstable. They recommended a temporary compromise that would let the Queen keep her voting rights until the end of the year. But the Archbishop of Canterbury refused to accept this compromise. He said that the coronation oath requires the sovereign to protect the established laws, which strictly limit royal power to the direct line of succession. Giving executive powers to a queen consort, even temporarily, would create a dangerous legal mess that could make future laws invalid. The Archbishop made it clear that the Church would not support any council that didn't place Prince William in absolute control. A new mystery arose when a clerk reviewed the signature page of the proposed joint council draft. He saw that it had already been stamped with the king's official seal using an automated digital signature machine. This was a huge problem. The signature machine is kept in a secure safe and requires two secret codes to operate, held by two different senior officials. The king had been resting at another estate on that date, and his diary showed he had not authorized any digital signatures. The lawyers launched a digital audit to trace the origin of the codes. The mystery was solved within 45 minutes. Network logs revealed that the Queen's personal private secretary had accessed the secure machine using a temporary code from the coronation planning. He had used this old, obsolete access to bypass security, trying to force the joint council document into law without the king's knowledge or his sister's required permission. The discovery of this digital break-in turned the constitutional debate into an active security investigation. The council immediately ruled the stamped document invalid, making the unauthorized joint council null and void. Princess Anne used this ruling to freeze all other constitutional drafts managed by the Queen's team. The hidden mechanism the Queen's advisors had created to gain a permanent share of power had been completely shattered. Prince William was now in total control of the upcoming state opening planning, and the Queen's role was strictly limited to that of a personal companion, with no power in the official paperwork. After the legal wins, the final confrontation came face to face. The heavy doors of a room at the Queen's London residence slammed shut. Queen Camilla had traveled back early from an event after getting an urgent message from her communications director. Princess Anne was already waiting, sitting calmly with a folder of evidence on her lap. The domestic staff was dismissed, and the curtains were drawn to keep anyone from hearing the argument. The Queen did not sit down. She stood by the fireplace, holding a copy of Anne's press transcript, and demanded an immediate public apology. She said Anne's comments had humiliated her and damaged the king's marriage. Anne remained completely calm and unmoved. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she opened her folder and placed three documents onto the table. The first was proof of the cloned identity card used to access the archives. The second was the digital log showing the unauthorized use of the king's signature machine. Anne looked directly at the Queen and said the public humiliation was the direct result of her own staff's illegal attempts to change the constitutional record behind the monarch's back. the Queen had no room to escape. Her private secretary had already been detained for questioning about the misuse of the security codes. The Queen tried to blame overzealous advisors, saying they were just trying to make sure the court's daily work could continue while the king was sick. She claimed the joint council was a practical necessity. Anne rejected this immediately, pointing out that the Prince of Wales is the legal heir and needs no permission from his stepfamily to manage his future inheritance. She told the Queen that trying to slip the document into law via an unauthorized stamp was a breach of trust that bordered on a constitutional coup. Anne delivered a clear ultimatum. Either the Queen's office would submit to a complete financial and administrative audit, or Anne would hand the evidence over to the police for a public investigation. The tension peaked when the Queen threatened to withdraw from all public appearances, including a major state visit, calculating that her absence would cause a media storm. But during the argument, a red light flashed on the internal phone. It was the King's private medical suite. He had been monitoring the security alerts and was demanding to be connected to the room. The women had to stop their argument while the King's voice came over the speaker. The King did not support his wife's demands. His voice was tired but firm. He told her to accept the boundaries, making it clear his first duty was to the continuity of the crown. He could not let personal loyalty cause a public legal battle. The king's intervention completely broke the queen's resistance. Anne then closed her folder, picked up the evidence, and left without another word. Finally, the consequences were felt in the bank accounts. A team of forensic accountants worked late into the night, reviewing every line of the queen's household spending. Princess Anne sat at the head of the table with a black pen, scrutinizing everything from travel allowances to catering budgets. She drew a thick line through 3 secret budget accounts that had previously been used without oversight. For years, the Queen's office had operated with a lot of financial independence, using secondary funding streams hidden within the general hospitality budget. This allowed her to fund personal projects and hire private consultants without the standard checks. Anne's audit brought this era to an abrupt end. The core of the financial rollback was the immediate freezing of 3 funding lines linked to the Queen's personal network. The accountants found that over £150,000 had been diverted from the public maintenance grant for a private project celebrating the Queen's family history. Anne ruled that this had zero public value and violated the rules for using public funds. She ordered the funding stopped immediately and the money returned. The cleanup extended to the palace payroll itself. The audit team identified 5 close friends of the Queen who had been given senior roles without standard compliance checks. These were personal stylists and media helpers. Anne terminated all 5 contracts, stating that the public purse would no longer pay for personal entourage positions that performed no official state duties. Tension grew when the Queen's financial director tried to block the terminations by appealing to the Treasury. He argued that losing personal staff would compromise her ability to do her official duties. The permanent secretary rejected the appeal immediately, confirming they would only accept orders that carried Princess Anne's personal signature. The fiscal rollback was reinforced by new transparency rules. Now, every single invitation to a state event had to come with a cost-benefit analysis. This blocked the Queen's office from using official banquets to entertain her personal friends. A final mystery developed when accountants checked the fuel depot logs. They found that a private fuel card, assigned to a commercial catering company, owned by a relative of the Queen's family, had been used 42 times at the castle's private pumps, charging over £12,000 of fuel to the King's travel account. The audit team investigated, and digital logs revealed the Queen's personal transport manager had been secretly keeping the card active. Anne immediately canceled the card and suspended the manager. She then implemented a new biometric verification system for all fuel and transport across the royal estate. From that moment on, no vehicle could get fuel without the driver scanning their official ID and entering a unique code. This closed the final loophole, locking down the palace infrastructure against any future unauthorized spending. The financial purge was complete. The 3 budget lines were erased, and the new payroll was sent for verification. Princess Anne had successfully stripped the Queen's faction of their independent spending power. The final act played out on the streets of London. The morning sun reflected off the polished helmets of the horse guards as the grand procession turned onto the main road. Tens of thousands of spectators lined the pavements as the king's carriage moved slowly toward the Palace of Westminster. Inside the lead carriage sat the king in his formal robes. Directly behind him rode Princess Anne on horseback in her traditional role, and next to her rode Prince William in military uniform. The visual message was unmistakable. The core bloodline had reclaimed total visible control. Further back, the queen traveled in a secondary, closed carriage, accompanied only by a lady-in-waiting. There were no members of her family visible in the VIP stands. The public seating had been entirely redrawn to ensure every seat in front of the television cameras was occupied by a working member of the royal family. The complete isolation of the queen's household was now a visible reality. The long-term impact of this power shift has permanently changed the monarchy. The alliance between Princess Anne and Prince William has established a new, streamlined system that will govern the court for the rest of the current reign and beyond. Every senior advisor now knows that all important decisions must be cleared through the joint oversight team. The backstairs influence that the Step family had slowly built up has been completely eradicated. The Queen's remaining staff have withdrawn from the main corridors of the palace, moving back to their private offices. The Queen has reportedly accepted the new boundaries, realizing any further challenge would only mean more audits and more staff cuts. Her role has been reset to that of a ceremonial companion, completely separate from the governance of the royal estate or the rules of succession. As the summer afternoon faded, the king and his family appeared on the palace balcony to greet the crowds. Princess Anne stood directly to the king's left, with Prince William and his children occupying the center. The image was one of absolute discipline and institutional continuity. Anne's calculated decision to break her silence at that small farm meeting had achieved its ultimate goal. The wall around the inner circle of the throne has been successfully rebuilt, ensuring the crown's ancient privileges and responsibilities will remain locked within the true royal bloodline for generations to come. The procession has passed, the ledgers are locked, and the true bloodline has firmly reclaimed the throne.